Good Erev Shabbat, the eve of the Sabbath from Friday, November 12th. And we are in the Jewish Hebrew month of Kislev, which is the month of which Hanukkah is celebrated. And in an upcoming video, I will explain the origins of the holiday of Hanukkah and explain the customs. Today, we're going to talk about the Haftarah. What is a Haftarah? It is a supplemental reading to the biblical portion that we read this Shabbat. The biblical portion that we read is called Vayeitzei, and that Jacob exited from where he was and he went to Haran in fleeing away from his brother Esav and also his father-in-law, lots of problems in the family. Then in the Haftarah, we read, they try to find a connection, a thematic tie-in to the Haftarah and the Parashat. In the prophetic reading, which is afterwards, and the Torah reading of the day. And it's interesting, maybe to me, is that you have a selection that is for the Sephardim, let's generalize the Eastern Jews, and then you have another group of Ashkenazim, which are the European Jews, and they have sort of crossover of text. However, today, following true to my being genetically Sephardic and environmentally Ashkenazi, I'm going to do the Ashkenazi, the European, the most popular Haftarah. It starts off from this man Hosea. Hosea was a prophet, and Hosea was interesting because God came to him, the prophet, and he goes, you know, this is already 2,500 years ago. God says to Hosea, I'm not happy with the way the Israelites are behaving. They are immoral and they're not worshiping me with respect and dignity. So Hosea has a flippant answer. And he goes, well, why don't you just go find another nation? And God says, I need to think about this. And what he does is he says, in the meanwhile, while I'm contemplating, you, Hosea, you need a wife. So he said, okay. And he says, I recommend you are going to marry this woman named Gomer. Gomer? Are you kidding? She's like Roxanne from the Police song. She's a prostitute. God says, this is what I'm telling you to do. Go and do. And he marries her. And he's actually she gives birth to 3 children. And these 3 children is something very, very perplexing. The names that he gave, Lo Ruchama, Yisrael, it's like God has no mercy, and that the seeds won't blossom in the Jezreel Valley. So now God comes to him years later and says, Hosea, divorce her. He goes, divorce her? What do you mean? You told me to marry her. I married her. I had children with her. You said, you don't know that they're your children. You don't know where she goes at night. He goes, I don't care. I've fallen in love with her. Even if she's unfaithful with me, we'll work out the problems. And God says, aha, now you know what it's like to be me, that I am the husband, and Israel, the nation of Israel, is the wife. And even though Israel was worshiping other deities, as upset as I got, I could forgive them. So now you learned about measure for mercy, the mercy measure. So that's the prelude to Hosea. And let's start in that it says, Jacob, he had to flee to Aram. And there he worked. This is the Parsha, the Torah portion. He worked 7 years for the first wife, he thought it was Rachel. It turns out it was Lavan's trick that he first had to work 7 years for Leah, and then another 7 years to marry Rachel. So that worked. And then Moses was the prophet that took Israel out of Egypt, and they made it. But now the 10 northern tribes, we're jumping forward 1,000 years, and the 10 northern tribes seceded from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, where the temple stood, Beit HaMikdash, King Solomon's temple. Obviously, it wasn't that important to them because they were worshiping idols. They didn't care about that. It was an impediment. They stick it in their side, Jerusalem. So now God speaks to Hosea and he goes, do you see what they're doing? They're worshiping Baal. They're worshiping idols. They bring their God down to earth. Israelites, Yehudim, Jews lift themselves and elevate from the physical to the spiritual. And they continue to sin. And that they're actually doing these ceremonies of making silver masks, and then they offer up their children as a sign of devotion, and then you get to win the prize. You get to kiss the golden calf of that time. And God says to Hosea, those people are going to diffuse, dissipate, and disappear. That's pretty amazing. And he says, there's one God, I'm the one God, and I will show you. And that these people, it's not a happy Haftorah. It's that the prophet is saying, you've got to change your evil ways. You guys, you're off track. You got to get on track. And then says that Israelites, Shuvah Yisrael, do teshuvah. God never moved away. You moved away. God's blessing is always there. You're just blocking it. People ask me, how do I feel close to God? I don't tell them what they should do. I share with them what they shouldn't do. Don't constrain the connection. Alleviate it. That's all. And by the absence of negative, the positive will flourish. And you see the Haftarah ending. Mi chacham, who's the wise man? V'yavein, and knowledgeable. Ele navon v'yedaim, that they are discerning and they know that the way of God ki yesharim darkei Hashem, that the way of God is straight. V'tzadikim yelchu bam, and the tzaddik, the righteous person, he's just going to go like on a railroad track and roll. Ufosheim, and the ones that are making mistakes and sinning, yikashluvam, that they're going to trip over themselves, running to do evil. And God says, this is the recipe. Eliminate the negative, and the positive will elevate you closer to me. Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy the message.